In 1492, Christopher Columbus sailed west trying to find a shorter route to get black pepper. Not gold, not territory. Pepper, because in 1492, a pound of black pepper in Europe cost the equivalent of $400 today. That's $400 for something you now buy for $3 at any grocery store. For 2,000 years, spices were the most valuable commodity in global trade. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg. They were worth more per pound than silver. Empires were built controlling spice routes. The Roman Empire spent 50 million sesterces annually on spices from India. The Portuguese Empire was funded by spice monopolies. The Dutch East India Company, the first major corporation in history, existed to control the spice trade. Fortunes were made, wars were fought. Entire economies depended on moving dried plant matter from Asia to Europe. And then, in 1876, a German engineer invented mechanical refrigeration. Within 50 years, the spice trade collapsed. Not declined, collapsed. Pepper prices fell 98%. Entire trading empires went bankrupt. Cities that were built on spice wealth became irrelevant. And nobody talks about this because it happened slowly enough that people didn't notice. But it's the most important economic collapse in modern history. And it teaches you something critical about how technology destroys value. Let me show you exactly what happened. To understand why refrigeration destroyed the spice trade, you need to understand why spices were valuable in the first place. And it wasn't just flavor, it was preservation. Before refrigeration, meat spoiled within days. Fish spoiled within hours. Dairy lasted maybe 2 days. In hot climates, even less. There was no way to store protein safely for extended periods. This created a massive problem for pre-industrial societies. You couldn't stockpile food. You couldn't transport meat long distances. You couldn't feed armies. You couldn't survive winters without fresh hunting. The only solution was preservation. And there were 3 methods: salting, smoking, and spicing. Salting worked, but made food nearly inedible. Salt-preserved meat was so hard and tasteless that sailors called it salt horse and complained it was worse than leather. Smoking worked better, but required constant fire and specific wood. It was labor-intensive and inconsistent. Spices were the premium solution. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves. They didn't just add flavor. They contained compounds that inhibited bacterial growth. They made preserved meat edible. They masked the taste of meat that was starting to spoil. They allowed you to store food for months instead of days. This made spices functionally priceless. If you lived in medieval Europe and needed to preserve meat for winter, you needed spices. There was no alternative. And spices only grew in specific tropical regions. Black pepper came from the Malabar coast of India. Cinnamon from Sri Lanka. Cloves and nutmeg, exclusively from the Maluku Islands in Indonesia. These regions had the climate, the soil, and the botany that couldn't be replicated elsewhere. This created a natural monopoly. You couldn't grow pepper in Europe. You couldn't cultivate cinnamon in temperate climates. If you wanted spices, you had to import them from Asia. And the journey from Asia to Europe was 6,000 miles through hostile territory. The spice trade route in the Middle Ages went from Indonesia to India by sea, from India to the Persian Gulf or Red Sea by sea, then overland through the Middle East, controlled by Arab merchants, then to Constantinople or Venice, controlled by Italian merchants, then distributed across Europe. Every step of that journey, merchants added markup. By the time pepper reached London, it had passed through a dozen middlemen. Each took profit. The result was that spices cost 100 to 200 times their origin price. A pound of pepper that cost a few coins in Kerala cost several weeks' wages in London. But people paid it because the alternative was starvation or inedible food. This is why Columbus sailed west. The Spanish crown funded his voyage specifically to find a direct sea route to Asia that bypassed the Middle Eastern and Italian middlemen. If Spain could trade directly with India and Indonesia, They could buy spices at origin prices and undercut the competition. Columbus failed to reach Asia, but when Vasco da Gama successfully sailed around Africa to India in 1498, Portugal gained direct access to the spice trade. This was the foundation of the Portuguese Empire. Portugal didn't colonize India. They established fortified trading posts: Goa, Cochin, Calicut. They negotiated with local rulers. They bought pepper, cinnamon, and other spices at source prices. Then they shipped them directly to Lisbon, bypassing all middlemen. The profit margin was staggering. A Portuguese ship could buy pepper in India for the equivalent of $2 per pound, ship it to Europe, and sell it for $400 per pound. That's a 200-to-1 return. A single successful spice voyage could pay for the ship, the crew, the cargo, and still generate enough profit to fund the next 3 voyages. This is why Portugal became wealthy. The Portuguese crown took a percentage of every spice shipment. By 1520, spice revenues were funding the entire Portuguese government. No domestic taxation needed, just skim profit from pepper. But Portugal couldn't maintain the monopoly. The Dutch wanted in. In 1602, the Dutch East India Company (VOC) was founded with a specific mission: break the Portuguese spice monopoly and establish Dutch control. The VOC wasn't just a trading company. It was a military and political power. It had its own army, navy, and the authority to negotiate treaties and wage war. The VOC conquered Portuguese trading posts. They seized control of the Maluku Islands where cloves and nutmeg grew. They established a brutal monopoly. To keep prices high, the VOC controlled supply. They destroyed excess spice crops. They burned warehouses of nutmeg to prevent oversupply. They massacred populations on spice islands to prevent unauthorized trade. This wasn't business. This was economic warfare to maintain artificial scarcity, and it worked. From 1650 to 1800, the Dutch controlled the spice trade. They maintained prices at astronomical levels. Then they became the wealthiest nation in Europe per capita. Amsterdam was the richest city in the world, built on spice profits. But the entire system was built on one assumption: spices were necessary for food preservation. That assumption held for 2,000 years. Then it broke. In 1834, American inventor Jacob Perkins built the first practical vapor compression refrigeration system. It was mechanical, not reliant on ice. It could create consistent cold temperatures in any climate. But early refrigeration was expensive, unreliable, and used toxic gases like ammonia. It was industrial, not domestic. Meatpacking plants used it, breweries used it. But it wasn't widespread. Then, in 1876, German engineer Carl von Linde invented a better refrigeration system using liquefied ammonia. This was more efficient, more reliable, and scalable. By the 1880s, commercial refrigeration spread across Europe and America. By 1900, refrigerated rail cars were transporting meat long distances. By 1920, refrigerated ships were crossing oceans. By 1930, home refrigerators were becoming common in wealthy households. The impact on the spice trade was immediate and devastating. If you could refrigerate meat, you didn't need spices to preserve it. Refrigeration was cheaper, more effective, and more reliable than spicing. A refrigerated cold room could store meat for weeks without any additives. Refrigerated transport could move meat from Chicago to New York without spoilage. Suddenly, the 2,000-year-old preservation function of spices was obsolete. Spices were no longer necessary. They were optional. They were luxury flavoring, not survival necessity. The price collapsed. In 1870, black pepper cost about $1.20 per pound in New York, about $30 today. By 1920, it cost 15 cents per pound, about $2 today. That's a 90% price collapse in 50 years. Cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, all followed the same trajectory. The bottom fell out of the market. and the economic consequences rippled everywhere. The Dutch East India Company had already been dissolved in 1799 after bankruptcy. But Dutch colonial holdings in Indonesia had remained profitable through spice exports. After refrigeration, that profit disappeared. Indonesia was no longer a spice goldmine. It was a money-losing colony. The Netherlands spent the early 1900s trying to transition Indonesian agriculture to rubber, coffee, and other commodities. But the wealth was gone. Venice, which had been the spice trade hub for Europe for 500 years, lost its primary source of wealth. Venice in the 1500s was one of the richest cities on earth. Venice in the 1900s was a tourist destination living on past glory. The shift from trading hub to museum happened because the trade that built Venice became worthless. The Malabar coast of India, which had exported pepper for 2,000 years, saw demand collapse. The port cities that had thrived on spice exports, Calicut, Cochin, became economically marginal. The global trade routes that had connected Asia and Europe for millennia shifted. Instead of spices flowing west, refrigerated meat, dairy, and produce began flowing in all directions. The geography of trade reorganized around cold chain logistics, not spice routes. But here's what most people miss. The spice trade didn't just collapse in price, it collapsed in strategic importance. Before refrigeration, controlling spice trade was a national priority. Empires fought wars for it. After refrigeration, spices were irrelevant to national strategy. Nobody fights wars over pepper anymore. It's a cheap commodity. This is the key insight. Technology doesn't just change prices. It changes what matters. Spices mattered more than almost anything. Then refrigeration was invented, and they didn't matter at all. This pattern repeats throughout history. Technological shifts destroy entire categories of value. And the people who built their wealth on the old technology lose everything. Let me show you other examples where the exact same pattern played out. Whale oil and kerosene. In the 1850s, whale oil was the primary fuel for lamps. It was expensive. Whaling was dangerous. But there was no alternative. A whale oil lamp was how you lit your home. Then in 1859, oil was discovered in Pennsylvania. Kerosene could be refined from petroleum. It was cheaper, cleaner, and brighter than whale oil. Within 20 years, the whaling industry collapsed. By 1880, most whaling companies were bankrupt. Entire port towns knew, Bedford, Nantucket, from wealthy to economically depressed. The capital that had been invested in whaling ships, processing facilities, and expertise became worthless overnight. Ice harvesting and mechanical refrigeration. In the 1800s, ice was harvested from frozen lakes in winter and stored in insulated warehouses. Ice was a major industry. Thousands of workers cut ice. Ships transported ice globally. Ice houses in cities stored it for summer. Then mechanical refrigeration was invented. You could make ice anytime, anywhere. The ice harvesting industry collapsed in 2 decades. By 1920, it was gone. The lakes where ice was cut, the warehouses where it was stored, the shipping companies that moved it, all obsolete. Telegraph and transatlantic communication. Before the telegraph, information moved at the speed of ships. News from London took 2 weeks to reach New York. This created arbitrage opportunities. Traders who knew European prices could buy and sell in American markets before the information arrived. Entire fortunes were built on information delay. Then the first transatlantic telegraph cable was laid in 1866. Information crossed the Atlantic in minutes. The arbitrage disappeared. Traders who had been wealthy through information advantage went bankrupt. The capital invested in fast ships designed to carry news became worthless. The pattern is identical every time. A technology emerges. It provides a new capability. The old industry becomes obsolete. Prices collapse. Strategic importance disappears. Capital is destroyed. The people who were rich from the old system lose their wealth, and society moves on. Most people don't even remember the old industry existed. When's the last time you thought about whale oil? When's the last time you considered that pepper used to cost $400 per pound? You don't, because once the technology shifts, the old system becomes invisible. It's not part of how you think about the world. But for the people living through it, the collapse was catastrophic. Now let me show you why this matters today. Because the same pattern is happening right now. And most people don't see it. Fossil fuel energy and renewables. Oil, coal, and natural gas are the foundation of the global economy. They power transportation, electricity, manufacturing. Trillions of dollars of infrastructure are built around fossil fuels. Entire nations, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Venezuela, funded by oil revenues. But solar and wind energy are improving exponentially. Solar panel costs have fallen 90% in 15 years. Battery storage is scaling rapidly. Within 20 years, renewable energy could be cheaper and more reliable than fossil fuels. When that happens, oil becomes like spices after refrigeration. It doesn't disappear entirely, but it loses strategic importance. Oil goes from $80 per barrel to maybe $20. The entire Middle Eastern economy restructures. Russia's primary revenue source collapses. Trillions in fossil fuel infrastructure become stranded assets. This isn't prediction. It's pattern recognition. Internal combustion vehicles and electric vehicles. For 120 years, cars have run on gasoline engines. Trillions are invested in engine manufacturing, oil refining, gas stations. Entire supply chains exist to support this. But electric vehicles are reaching cost parity with gas vehicles. When EVs are cheaper to buy and operate, gas cars become obsolete. Not slowly, rapidly, because once consumers prefer EVs, the entire infrastructure supporting gas cars loses value. Gas stations close. Engine factories shut down. Oil demand collapses. This isn't about whether EVs are better. It's about what happens when technology makes the old system unnecessary. The capital invested in the old system evaporates. Just like spice trade infrastructure became worthless after refrigeration. Traditional retail and e-commerce. Physical retail was the only way to buy goods for thousands of years. Shopping malls, department stores, retail workers. Then e-commerce emerged. Amazon, Alibaba, online shopping. The convenience and price advantage are overwhelming. Physical retail is collapsing. Malls are closing. Retail chains are bankrupt. The commercial real estate built for retail is becoming worthless. This is the spice trade pattern. The old system doesn't just shrink. It becomes structurally obsolete. Cable television and streaming. For 40 years, cable TV was how people watched content. Cable companies had monopolies. They charged high prices. Then, streaming emerged. Netflix, YouTube, Disney+. Cable subscriptions are collapsing. From 100 million U.S. households in 2010 to 65 million in 2024. The infrastructure built for cable the networks, the contracts, the business models is becoming obsolete. The capital is being destroyed. The pattern is always the same. The old industry doesn't see it coming. They think they're too big to fail. They think demand is permanent. The spice traders in 1870 thought spices would always be valuable. They were wrong. Refrigeration destroyed the industry in 50 years. Oil executives today think oil will always be necessary. They might be wrong. Solar and EVs could destroy the industry in 30 years. The technological shift doesn't care about your investment. It doesn't care about your infrastructure. It doesn't care about your business model. When a better solution emerges, the old solution loses value. Fast. Refrigeration destroyed 2,000 years of spice trade wealth in 50 years. The merchants, the trading companies, the empires built on spices. They all collapsed because technology made their entire industry obsolete. This wasn't gradual decline. This was structural collapse. and it's happening right now in multiple industries. Fossil fuels, internal combustion engines, physical retail, cable TV, all built on assumptions that technology is breaking. The capital invested in these industries will evaporate, just like spice trade capital evaporated after refrigeration. This is what Histofund shows you. The patterns that repeat across centuries. The technological shifts that destroy wealth. The structural collapses that most people don't see until it's too late. If this video showed you how refrigeration collapsed the spice trade and why that pattern matters today, subscribe to Histofund. Because understanding these patterns isn't academic. It's understanding where value is being destroyed and where it's being created. Next episode, we be breaking down how the printing press destroyed the Catholic Church's information monopoly and restructured all of European power in 100 years. Same pattern, different technology, same result. Subscribe now. History isn't dead stories. It's the pattern that's happening right now.